Chapter 30. I have paid a visit to the Heights, but I have not seen her since she left. Joseph held the door in his hand when I called to ask after her, and wouldn't let me pass. He said Mrs. Linton was thrang, and the master was not in. Zillah has told me something of the way they go on, otherwise I should hardly know who was dead and who living. She thinks Catherine haughty, and does not like her, I can guess by her talk. My young lady asked some aid of her when she first came, but Mr. Heathcliff told her to follow her own business, and let his daughter-in-law look after herself, and Zillah willingly acquiesced, being a narrow-minded, selfish woman. Catherine evinced a child's annoyance at this neglect, repaid it with contempt, and thus enlisted my informant among her enemies, as securely as if she had done her some great wrong. I had a long talk with Zillah about 6 weeks ago, a little before you came, one day when we foregathered on the moor, and this is what she told me. The first thing Mrs. Linton did, she said, on her arrival at the Heights, was to run upstairs, without even wishing good evening to me and Joseph. She shut herself into Linton's room, and remained till morning. Then, while the master and Earnshaw were at breakfast, she entered the house, and asked all in a quiver if the doctor might be sent for. Her cousin was very ill. We know that, answered Heathcliff. But his life is not worth a farthing, and I won't spend a farthing on him. But I cannot tell how to do, she said, and if nobody will help me he'll die. Walk out of the room, cried the master, and let me never hear a word more about him. None here care what becomes of him. If you do, act the nurse. If you do not, lock him up and leave him. Then she began to bother me, and I said I'd had enough plague with the tiresome thing. We each had our tasks, and hers was to wait on Linton. Mr. Heathcliff bid me leave that labour to her. How they managed together, I can't tell. I fancy he fretted a great deal, and moaned hissel night and day. And she had precious little rest, one could guess by her white face and heavy eyes. She sometimes came into the kitchen all wildered-like, and looked as if she would fain beg assistance. But I was not going to disobey the master. I never dare disobey him, Mrs. Dean, and though I thought it wrong that Kenneth should not be sent for, it was no concern of mine either to advise or complain, and I always refused to meddle. Once or twice, after we had gone to bed, I've happened to open my door again, and seen her sitting crying on the stairs, top, and then I've shut myself in quick, for fear of being moved to interfere. I did pity her then, I'm sure. Still, I didn't wish to lose my place, you know. At last, one night she came boldly into my chamber, and frightened me out of my wits by saying, "Tell Mr. Heathcliff that his son is dying." I'm sure he is, this time. Get up instantly and tell him. Having uttered this speech, she vanished again. I lay a quarter of an hour listening and trembling. Nothing stirred. The house was quiet. She's mistaken, I said to myself. He's got over it. I needn't disturb them, and I began to doze, but my sleep was marred a second time by a sharp ringing of the bell, the only bell we have, put up on purpose for Linton, and the master called to me to see what was the matter, and informed them that he wouldn't have that noise repeated. I delivered Catherine's message. He cursed to himself, and in a few minutes came out with a lighted candle, and proceeded to their room. I followed. Mrs. Heathcliff was seated by the bedside, with her hands folded on her knees. Her father-in-law went up, held the light to Linton's face, looked at him, and touched him. Afterwards he turned to her. "Now, Catherine," he said, "how do you feel?" She was dumb. "How do you feel, Catherine?" he repeated. "He's safe and I'm free," she answered. "I should feel well. But," she continued, with a bitterness she couldn't conceal, "you have left me so long to struggle against death alone, that I feel and see only death. I feel like death." And she looked like it too. I gave her a little wine. Hareton and Joseph, who had been wakened by the ringing and the sound of feet, and heard our talk from outside, now entered. Joseph was fain, I believe, of the lad's removal. Hareton seemed a thought bothered, though he was more taken up with staring at Catherine than thinking of Linton. But the master bid him get off to bed again. We didn't want his help. He afterwards made Joseph remove the body to his chamber, and told me to return to mine, and Mrs. Heathcliff remained by herself. In the morning, he sent me to tell her she must come down to breakfast. She had undressed and appeared going to sleep, and said she was ill, at which I hardly wondered. I informed Mr. Heathcliff, and he replied, "Well, let her be till after the funeral, and go up now and then to get her what is needful, and as soon as she seems better, tell me." Cathy stayed upstairs a fortnight, according to Zillah, who visited her twice a day, and would have been rather more friendly, but her attempts at increasing kindness were proudly and promptly repelled. Heathcliff went up once, to show her Linton's will. He had bequeathed the whole of his, and what had been her, movable property, to his father. The poor creature was threatened or coaxed into that act during her week's absence, when his uncle died. The lands, being a minor, he could not meddle with. However, Mr. Heathcliff has claimed and kept them in his wife's right and his also. I suppose legally, at any rate. Catherine, destitute of cash and friends, cannot disturb his possession. Nobody, said Zillah, ever approached her door except that once but and nobody asked anything about her. The first occasion of her coming down into the house was on a Sunday afternoon. She had cried out when I carried up her dinner that she couldn't bear any longer being in the cold, and I told her the master was going to Thrushcross Grange, and Earnshaw and I needn't hinder her from descending. So, as soon as she heard Heathcliff's horse trot off, she made her appearance, donned in black, and her yellow curls combed back behind her ears as plain as a Quaker. She couldn't comb them out. Joseph and I generally go to chapel on Sundays. The kirk, you know, has no minister now, explained Mrs. Dean. And they call the Methodists, or Baptists, place, I can't say which it is, at Gimmerton, a chapel. Joseph had gone, she continued. But I thought proper to bide at home. Young folks are always the better for an elder's overlooking, and Hareton, with all his bashfulness, isn't a model of nice behaviour. I let him know that his cousin would very likely sit with us, and she had been always used to see the Sabbath respected, so he had as good leave his guns and bits of indoor work alone, while she stayed. He coloured up at the news, and cast his eyes over his hands and clothes. The train oil and gunpowder were shoved out of sight in a minute. I saw he meant to give her his company, and I guessed by his way he wanted to be presentable. So, laughing, as I durst not laugh when the master is by, I offered to help him if he would, and joked at his confusion. He grew sullen, and began to swear. Now, Mrs. Dean, Zillah went on, seeing me not pleased by her manner, you happen think your young lady too fine for Mr. Hareton, and happen you're right. But I own I should love well to bring her pride a peg lower. And what will all her learning and her daintiness do for her now? She's as poor as you or I. Poorer, I'll be bound. You're saving, and I'm doing my little all that road. Hareton allowed Zillah to give him her aid, and she flattered him into a good humour. So, when Catherine came, half forgetting her former insults, he tried to make himself agreeable by the housekeeper's account. Mrs. walked in, she said, as chill as an icicle, and as high as a princess. I got up and offered her my seat in the armchair. No, she turned up her nose at my civility. Earnshaw rose too, and bid her come to the settle, and sit close by the fire. He was sure she was starved. I've been starved a month and more, she answered, resting on the word as scornful as she could. And she got a chair for herself, and placed it at a distance from both of us. Having sat till she was warm, she began to look round, and discovered a number of books on the dresser. She was instantly upon her feet again, stretching to reach them, but they were too high up. Her cousin, after watching her endeavours a while, at last summoned courage to help her. She held her frock, and he filled it with the first that came to hand. That was a great advance for the lad. She didn't thank him still. He felt gratified that she had accepted his assistance, and ventured to stand behind as she examined them, and even to stoop and point out what struck his fancy in certain old pictures which they contained. Nor was he daunted by the saucy style in which she jerked the page from his finger. He contented himself with going a bit farther back and looking at her instead of the book. She continued reading, or seeking for something to read. His attention became by degrees quite centred in the study of her thick silky curls. Her face he couldn't see, and she couldn't see him. And perhaps not quite awake to what he did, but attracted like a child to a candle. At last he proceeded from staring to touching. He put out his hand and stroked one curl, as gently as if it were a bird. He might have stuck a knife into her neck, she started round in such a taking. "Get away this moment! How dare you touch me? Why are you stopping there?" she cried in a tone of disgust. "I can't endure you. I'll go upstairs again if you come near me." Mr. Hareton recoiled, looking as foolish as he could do. He sat down in the settle very quiet, and she continued turning over her volumes another half-hour. Finally, Earnshaw crossed over, and whispered to me, "Will you ask her to read to us, Zillah? I'm stalled of doing naught, and I could like to hear her. Dunnot say I wanted it, but ask of yourseln." "Mr. Hareton wishes you would read to us, ma'am," I said immediately. "He'd take it very kind. He'd be much obliged." She frowned, and looking up answered, Mr. Hareton and the whole set of you will be good enough to understand that I reject any pretense at kindness you have the hypocrisy to offer. I despise you, and will have nothing to say to any of you. When I would have given my life for one kind word, even to see one of your faces, you all kept off. But I won't complain to you. I'm driven down here by the cold, not either to amuse you or enjoy your society. What could I have done? Began Earnshaw. How was I to blame? Oh, you are an exception, answered Mrs. Heathcliff. I never missed such a concern as you. But I offered more than once, and asked, he said, kindling up at her pertness. I asked Mr. Heathcliff to let me wait for you. Be silent. I'll go out of doors or anywhere rather than have your disagreeable voice in my ear, said my lady. Hareton muttered she might go to hell for him, and unslinging his gun, restrained himself from his Sunday occupations no longer. He talked now freely enough, and she presently saw fit to retreat to her solitude. But the frost had set in, and in spite of her pride, she was forced to condescend to our company, more and more. However, I took care there should be no further scorning at my good nature. Ever since, I've been as stiff as herself, and she has no lover or liker among us, and she does not deserve one, for let them say the least word to her, and she'll curl back without respect of anyone. She'll snap at the master himself, and as good as dares him to thrash her, and the more hurt she gets, the more venomous she grows. At first, on hearing this account from Zillah, I determined to leave my situation, take a cottage, and get Catherine to come and live with me. But Mr. Heathcliff would as soon permit that, as he would set up Hareton in an independent house. And I can see no remedy at present, unless she could marry again. And that scheme it does not come within my province to arrange. And I to 19 times asterisk. Thus ended Mrs. Dean's story. Notwithstanding the doctor's prophecy, I am rapidly recovering strength, and though it be only the second week in January, I propose getting out on horseback in a day or two, and riding over to Wuthering Heights, to inform my landlord that I shall spend the next 6 months in London, and, if he likes, he may look out for another tenant to take the place after October. I would not pass another winter here for much. Chapter 31. Yesterday was bright, calm, and frosty. I went to the Heights as I proposed. My housekeeper entreated me to bear a little note from her to her young lady, and I did not refuse, for the worthy woman was not conscious of anything odd in her request. The front door stood open, but the jealous gate was fastened, as at my last visit. I knocked and invoked Earnshaw from among the garden beds. He unchained it, and I entered. The fellow is as handsome a rustic as need be seen. I took particular notice of him this time, but then he does his best apparently to make the least of his advantages. I asked if Mr. Heathcliff were at home. He answered, no, but he would be in at dinner time. It was 11 o'clock, and I announced my intention of going in and waiting for him, at which he immediately flung down his tools and accompanied me, in the office of watchdog, not as a substitute for the host. We entered together. Catherine was there, making herself useful in preparing some vegetables for the approaching meal. She looked more sulky and less spirited than when I had seen her first. She hardly raised her eyes to notice me, and continued her employment with the same disregard to common forms of politeness as before, never returning my bow and good morning by the slightest acknowledgement. She does not seem so amiable, I thought, as Mrs. Dean would persuade me to believe. She's a beauty, it is true, but not an angel. Earnshaw surlily bid her remove her things to the kitchen. Remove them yourself, she said, pushing them from her as soon as she had done, and retiring to a stool by the window, where she began to carve figures of birds and beasts out of the turnip parings in her lap. I approached her, pretending to desire a view of the garden, and as I fancied, adroitly dropped Mrs. Dean's note onto her knee, unnoticed by Hareton. But she asked aloud, "What is that?" and chucked it off. "A letter from your old acquaintance, the housekeeper at the Grange," I answered, annoyed at her exposing my kind deed, and fearful lest it should be imagined a missive of my own. She would gladly have gathered it up at this information, but Hareton beat her. He seized and put it in his waistcoat, saying Mr. Heathcliff should look at it first. Thereat, Catherine silently turned her face from us, and very stealthily drew out her pocket handkerchief and applied it to her eyes. And her cousin, after struggling a while to keep down his softer feelings, pulled out the letter and flung it on the floor beside her, as ungraciously as he could. Catherine caught and perused it eagerly. Then she put a few questions to me concerning the inmates, rational and irrational, of her former home, and gazing towards the hills, murmured in soliloquy, "I should like to be riding Minnie down there. I should like to be climbing up there. Oh, I'm tired. I'm stalled, Hareton." And she leant her pretty head back against the sill, with half a yawn and half a sigh, and lapsed into an aspect of abstracted sadness, neither caring nor knowing whether we remarked her. "Mrs. Heathcliff," I said, after sitting some time mute, "you are not aware that I am an acquaintance of yours. So intimate that I think it strange you won't come and speak to me. My housekeeper never wearies of talking about and praising you, and shall be greatly disappointed if I return with no news of or from you, except that you received her letter and said nothing." She appeared to wonder at this speech, and asked, "Does Ellen like you?" "Yes, very well," I replied hesitatingly. "You must tell her," she continued, "that I would answer her letter, but I have no materials for writing, not even a book from which I might tear a leaf." "No books?" I exclaimed. "How do you contrive to live here without them, if I may take the liberty to inquire? Though provided with a large library, I'm frequently very dull at the Grange. Take my books away, and I should be desperate." "I was always reading when I had them," said Catherine, "and Mr. Heathcliff never reads, so he took it into his head to destroy my books. I have not had a glimpse of one for weeks. Only once I searched through Joseph's store of theology, to his great irritation. And once, Hareton, I came upon a secret stock in your room, some Latin and Greek, and some tales and poetry, all old friends. I brought the last here, and you gathered them, as a magpie gathers silver spoons, for the mere love of stealing. They are of no use to you, or else you concealed them in the bad spirit that, as you cannot enjoy them, nobody else shall. Perhaps your envy counselled Mr. Heathcliff to rob me of my treasures, but I've most of them written on my brain and printed in my heart, and you cannot deprive me of those." Earnshaw blushed crimson when his cousin made this revelation of his private literary accumulations, and stammered an indignant denial of her accusations. "Mr. Hareton is desirous of increasing his amount of knowledge," I said, coming to his rescue. "He is not envious, but emulous of your attainments. He'll be a clever scholar in a few years." "And he wants me to sink into a dunce meantime," answered Catherine. "Yes. I hear him trying to spell and read to himself, and pretty blunders he makes. I wish you would repeat Chevy Chase as you did yesterday. It was extremely funny. I heard you, and I heard you turning over the dictionary to seek out the hard words, and then cursing because you couldn't read their explanations." The young man evidently thought it too bad that he should be laughed at for his ignorance, and then laughed at for trying to remove it. I had a similar notion, and remembering Mrs. Dean's anecdote of his first attempt at enlightening the darkness in which he had been reared, I observed, "But, Mrs. Heathcliff, we have each had a commencement, and each stumbled and tottered on the threshold. Had our teachers scorned instead of aiding us, we should stumble and totter yet." "Oh," she replied, "I don't wish to limit his acquirements. Still, he has no right to appropriate what is mine, and make it ridiculous to me with his vile mistakes and mispronunciations. Those books, both prose and verse, are consecrated to me by other associations, and I hate to have them debased and profaned in his mouth. Besides of all, he has selected my favourite pieces, that I love the most to repeat, as if out of deliberate malice." Hareton's chest heaved in silence a minute. He laboured under a severe sense of mortification and wrath, which it was no easy task to suppress. I rose and, from a gentlemanly idea of relieving his embarrassment, took up my station in the doorway, surveying the external prospect as I stood. He followed my example, and left the room, but presently reappeared, bearing half a dozen volumes in his hands, which he threw into Catherine's lap, exclaiming, "Take them! I never want to hear, or read, or think of them again." "I won't have them now," she answered. "I shall connect them with you, and hate them." She opened one that had obviously been often turned over, and read a portion in the drawling tone of a beginner, then laughed, and threw it from her. "And listen," she continued provokingly, commencing a verse of an old ballad in the same fashion. "But his self-love would endure no further torment." I heard, and not altogether disapprovingly, a manual check given to her saucy tongue. The little wretch had done her utmost to hurt her cousin's sensitive, though uncultivated feelings, and a physical argument was the only mode he had of balancing the account, and repaying its effects on the inflictor. He afterwards gathered the books and hurled them on the fire. I read in his countenance what anguish it was to offer that sacrifice to spleen. I fancied that as they consumed he recalled the pleasure they had already imparted, and the triumph and ever-increasing pleasure he had anticipated from them. And I fancied I guessed the incitement to his secret studies also. He had been content with daily labour and rough animal enjoyments, till Catherine crossed his path. Shame at her scorn, and hope of her approval, were his first prompters to higher pursuits. And instead of guarding him from one, and winning him to the other, his endeavours to raise himself had produced just the contrary result. "Yes, that's all the good that such a brute as you can get from them," cried Catherine, sucking her damaged lip, and watching the conflagration with indignant eyes. "You'd better hold your tongue now," he answered fiercely, and his agitation precluded further speech. He advanced hastily to the entrance, where I made way for him to pass. But ere he had crossed the door-stones, Mr. Heathcliff, coming up the causeway, encountered him, and laying hold of his shoulder asked, "What's to do now, my lad?" Naught," he said, and broke away to enjoy his grief and anger in solitude. Heathcliff gazed after him, and sighed. "It will be odd if I thwart myself," he muttered, unconscious that I was behind him. "But, when I look for his father in his face, I find her every day more. How the devil is he so like? I can hardly bear to see him." He bent his eyes to the ground, and walked moodily in. There was a restless, anxious expression in his countenance I had never remarked there before, and he looked sparer in person. His daughter-in-law, on perceiving him through the window, immediately escaped to the kitchen, so that I remained alone. "I'm glad to see you out of doors again, Mr. Lockwood," he said in reply to my greeting. "From selfish motives partly, I don't think I could readily supply your loss in this desolation. I've wondered more than once what brought you here." "An idle whim, I fear, sir," was my answer. "Or else an idle whim is going to spirit me away. I shall set out for London next week, and I must give you warning that I feel no disposition to retain Thrushcross Grange beyond the 12 months I agreed to rent it. I believe I shall not live there any more." "Oh, indeed, you're tired of being banished from the world, are you?" he said. "But if you be coming to plead off paying for a place you won't occupy, your journey is useless. I never relent in exacting my due from anyone." "I'm coming to plead off nothing about it," I exclaimed, considerably irritated. "Should you wish it, I'll settle with you now." And I drew my notebook from my pocket. No, he replied coolly. "You'll leave sufficient behind to cover your debts if you fail to return. I'm not in such a hurry. Sit down and take your dinner with us. A guest that is safe from repeating his visit can generally be made welcome. Catherine, bring the things in. Where are you?" Catherine reappeared, bearing a tray of knives and forks. "You may get your dinner with Joseph," muttered Heathcliff aside, "and remain in the kitchen till he is gone." She obeyed his directions very punctually. Perhaps she had no temptation to transgress. Living among clowns and misanthropists, she probably cannot appreciate a better class of people when she meets them. With Mr. Heathcliff, grim and saturnine, on the one hand, and Hareton, absolutely dumb, on the other, I made a somewhat cheerless meal, and bade adieu early. I would have departed by the back way to get a last glimpse of Catherine and annoy old Joseph, but Hareton received orders to lead up my horse, and my host himself escorted me to the door, so I could not fulfill my wish. How dreary life gets over in that house, I reflected, while riding down the road. What a realization of something more romantic than a fairy tale it would have been for Mrs. Linton Heathcliff, had she and I struck up an attachment, as her good nurse desired, and migrated together into the stirring atmosphere of the town. Chapter 32. 1802. This September I was invited to devastate the moors of a friend in the north, and on my journey to his abode, I unexpectedly came within 15 miles of Gimmerton. The ostler at a roadside public house was holding a pail of water to refresh my horses, when a cart of very green oats, newly reaped, passed by, and he remarked, "Yon's Frau Gimmerton. Na, they're Alice 3 Wick, after other folk their harvest." Gimmerton, I repeated. My residence in that locality had already grown dim and dreamy. "Ah, I know. How far is it from this?" "Happen 14 mile o'er Thas, hills, and a rough road," he answered. A sudden impulse seized me to visit Thrushcross Grange. It was scarcely noon, and I conceived that I might as well pass the night under my own roof, as in an inn. Besides, I could spare a day easily to arrange matters with my landlord, and thus save myself the trouble of invading the neighborhood again. Having rested a while, I directed my servant to inquire the way to the village, and with great fatigue to our beasts, we managed the distance in some 3 hours. I left him there, and proceeded down the valley alone. The grey church looked greyer, and the lonely churchyard lonelier. I distinguished a moor sheep cropping the short turf on the graves. It was sweet, warm weather, too warm for travelling, but the heat did not hinder me from enjoying the delightful scenery above and below. Had I seen it nearer August, I'm sure it would have tempted me to waste a month among its solitudes. In winter nothing more dreary, in summer nothing more divine, than those glens shut in by hills and those bluff, bold swells of heath. I reached the grange before sunset, and knocked for admittance. But the family had retreated into the back premises, I judged, by one thin blue wreath curling from the kitchen chimney, and they did not hear. I rode into the court. Under the porch, a girl of 9 or 10 sat knitting, and an old woman reclined on the house steps, smoking a meditative pipe. "Is Mrs. Dean within?" I demanded of the dame. "Mistress Dean? Nay," she answered. "She doesn't bide here. She's up at Th Heights." "Are you the housekeeper then?" I continued. "I'll keep th' house," she replied. "Well, I'm Mr. Lockwood, the master. Are there any rooms to lodge me in, I wonder? I wish to stay all night." Meister," she cried in astonishment. "Wet, whoever knew ya were coming? Ya sud ha, send word. They's nowt nor the dry nor mensful about place, nowt there isn't." She threw down her pipe and bustled in. The girl followed, and I entered too. Soon perceiving that her report was true, and moreover that I had almost upset her wits by my unwelcome apparition, I bade her be composed. I would go out for a walk, and meantime she must try to prepare a corner of a sitting room for me to sup in, and a bedroom to sleep in. No sweeping and dusting, only good fire and dry sheets were necessary. She seemed willing to do her best, though she thrust the hearth-brush into the grates in mistake for the poker, and malappropriated several other articles of her craft. But I retired, confiding in her energy for a resting place against my return. Wuthering Heights was the goal of my proposed excursion. An afterthought brought me back, when I had quitted the court. "All well at the Heights?" I inquired of the woman. "For OWTEE no," she answered, scurrying away with a pan of hot cinders. I would have asked why Mrs. Dean had deserted the Grange, but it was impossible to delay her at such a crisis, so I turned away and made my exit rambling leisurely, along with the glow of a sinking sun behind, and the mild glory of a rising moon in front, one fading and the other brightening, as I quitted the park, and climbed the stony by-road, branching off to Mr. Heathcliff's dwelling. Before I arrived in sight of it, all that remained of day was a beamless amber light along the west, but I could see every pebble on the path, and every blade of grass, by that splendid moon. I had neither to climb the gate, nor to knock, it yielded to my hand. That is an improvement, I thought. And I noticed another, by the aid of my nostrils. A fragrance of stocks and wallflowers wafted on the air from amongst the homely fruit trees. Both doors and lattices were open, and yet, as is usually the case in a coal district, a fine red fire illumined the chimney. The comfort which the eye derives from it renders the extra heat endurable. But the house of Wuthering Heights is so large that the inmates have plenty of space for withdrawing out of its influence, and accordingly, what inmates there were, had stationed themselves not far from one of the windows. I could both see them and hear them talk before I entered, and looked and listened in consequence, being moved thereto by a mingled sense of curiosity and envy that grew as I lingered. "Contrary," said a voice as sweet as a silver bell. "That for the 3rd time, you dunce. I'm not going to tell you again. Recollect, or I'll pull your hair." "Contrary, then," answered another, in deep but softened tones. "And now kiss me, for minding so well." "No, read it over first correctly, without a single mistake." The male speaker began to read. He was a young man, respectably dressed and seated at a table having a book before him. His handsome features glowed with pleasure, and his eyes kept impatiently wandering from the page to a small white hand over his shoulder, which recalled him by a smart slap on the cheek whenever its owner detected such signs of inattention. Its owner stood behind, her light shining ringlets blending, at intervals, with his brown locks, as she bent to superintend his studies, and her face. It was lucky he could not see her face, or he would never have been so steady. I could, and I bit my lip in spite, at having thrown away the chance I might have had of doing something besides staring at its smiting beauty. The task was done, not free from further blunders, but the pupil claimed a reward and received at least 5 kisses, which, however, he generously returned. Then they came to the door, and from their conversation I judged they were about to issue out and have a walk on the moors. I supposed I should be condemned in Hareton Earnshaw's heart, if not by his mouth, to the lowest pit in the infernal regions, if I showed my unfortunate person in his neighbourhood then. And feeling very mean and malignant, I skulked round to seek refuge in the kitchen. There was unobstructed admittance on that side also, and at the door sat my old friend Nellie Dean, sewing and singing a song, which was often interrupted from within by harsh words of scorn and intolerance, uttered in far from musical accents. I'd rather buy the Horf hev, and swearing I my lugs from morn to neat, nor hearken ye Siver, said the tenant of the kitchen, in answer to an unheard speech of Nellie's. It's a blazing shame, that I cannot open sen blessed book, but yah set up them glories to Satan, and all tarse, flaysome wickednesses that ever were born into the world. Oh, you're a right nout, and shoes another, and that poor lad, be lost atween ye. Poor lad, he added with a groan, he's witched, I'm sartin on't. Oh Lord, judge 'em, for there's nor the law nor justice among were rulers. No, or we should be sitting in flaming faggots, I suppose, retorted the singer. But wisht, old man, and read your Bible like a Christian, and never mind me. This is Fairy Annie's Wedding, a bonny tune. It goes to a dance. Mrs. Dean was about to recommence when I advanced, and recognizing me directly, she jumped to her feet, crying, "Why, bless you, Mr. Lockwood. How could you think of returning in this way, all shut up at Thrushcross Grange? You should have given us notice." "I've arranged to be accommodated there for as long as I shall stay," I answered. "I depart again tomorrow." "And how are you transplanted here, Mrs. Dean? Tell me that." "Zillah left, and Mr. Heathcliff wished me to come, soon after you went to London, and stay till you returned." "But step in, pray. Have you walked from Gimmerton this evening?" "From the Grange," I replied, "and while they make me lodging room there, I want to finish my business with your master, because I don't think of having another opportunity in a hurry." "What business, sir?" said Nellie, conducting me into the house. "He's gone out at present and won't return soon." "About the rent," I answered. "Oh, then it is with Mrs. Heathcliff you must settle," she observed. "Or rather with me. She has not learnt to manage her affairs yet, and I act for her. There's nobody else." I looked surprised. "Ah, you have not heard of Heathcliff's death, I see," she continued. "Heathcliff dead!" I exclaimed, astonished. "How long ago?" "3 months since. But sit down and let me take your hat, and I'll tell you all about it. Stop, you have had nothing to eat, have you?" "I want nothing. I have ordered supper at home." "You sit down too. I never dreamt of his dying." "Let me hear how it came to pass. You say you don't expect them back for some time. The young people?" "No, I have to scold them every evening for their late rambles, but they don't care for me. At least have a drink of our old ale. It will do you good. You seem weary." She hastened to fetch it before I could refuse, and I heard Joseph asking whether it warn't a crying scandal that she should have followers at her time of life, and then to get them jocks out o.t. Meister's cellar. He fair shamtoos, bide still and see it. She did not stay to retaliate, but re-entered in a minute, bearing a reaming silver pint, whose contents I lauded with becoming earnestness, and afterward she furnished me with the sequel of Heathcliff's history. He had a queer end, as she expressed it. "Night instummoned to Wuthering Heights within a fortnight of your leaving us," she said, and I obeyed joyfully for Catherine's sake. My first interview with her grieved and shocked me. She had altered so much since our separation. Mr. Heathcliff did not explain his reasons for taking a new mind about my coming here. He only told me he wanted me, and he was tired of seeing Catherine. I must make the little parlour my sitting room, and keep her with me. It was enough if he were obliged to see her once or twice a day. She seemed pleased at this arrangement, and by degrees I smuggled over a great number of books and other articles that had formed her amusement at the Grange, and flattered myself we should get on in tolerable comfort. The delusion did not last long. Catherine, contented at first in a brief space, grew irritable and restless. For one thing, she was forbidden to move out of the garden, and it fretted her sadly to be confined to its narrow bounds as spring drew on. For another, in following the house I was forced to quit her frequently, and she complained of loneliness. She preferred quarrelling with Joseph in the kitchen to sitting at peace in her solitude. I did not mind their skirmishes, but Hareton was often obliged to seek the kitchen also, when the master wanted to have the house to himself. And though in the beginning she either left it at his approach, or quietly joined in my occupations, and shunned remarking or addressing him, and though he was always as sullen and silent as possible, after a while, she changed her behaviour, and became incapable of letting him alone, talking at him, commenting on his stupidity and idleness, expressing her wonder how he could endure the life he lived, how he could sit a whole evening staring into the fire, and dozing. "He's just like a dog, is he not, Ellen?" she once observed, "or a cart horse. He does his work, eats his food and sleeps eternally. What a blank, dreary mind he must have. Do you ever dream, Hareton? And if you do, what is it about? But you can't speak to me." Then she looked at him. But he would neither open his mouth, nor look again. "He's perhaps dreaming now," she continued. He twitched his shoulder as Juno twitches hers. "Ask him, Ellen." "Mr. Hareton will ask the master to send you upstairs, if you don't behave," I said. He had not only twitched his shoulder, but clenched his fist, as if tempted to use it. "I know why Hareton never speaks, when I am in the kitchen," she exclaimed on another occasion. "He is afraid I shall laugh at him. Ellen, what do you think? He began to teach himself to read once, and because I laughed, he burnt his books and dropped it. Was he not a fool?" "Were not you naughty?" I said. "Answer me that." "Perhaps I was," she went on, "but I did not expect him to be so silly. Hareton, if I gave you a book, would you take it now? I'll try." She placed one she had been perusing on his hand. He flung it off, and muttered, if she did not give over, he would break her neck. "Well, I shall put it here," she said, "in the table drawer, and I'm going to bed." Then she whispered me to watch whether he touched it, and departed. But he would not come near it, and so I informed her in the morning, to her great disappointment. I saw she was sorry for his persevering sulkiness and indolence. Her conscience reproved her for frightening him off. Improving himself, she had done it effectually. But her ingenuity was at work to remedy the injury. While I ironed, or pursued other such stationary employments, as I could not well do in the parlour, she would bring some pleasant volume, and read it aloud to me. When Hareton was there, she generally paused in an interesting part, and left the book lying about. That she did repeatedly, but he was as obstinate as a mule, and instead of snatching at her bait, in wet weather he took to smoking with Joseph. And they sat like automatons, one on each side of the fire, the elder happily too deaf to understand her wicked nonsense, as he would have called it, the younger doing his best to seem to disregard it. On fine evenings the latter followed his shooting expeditions, and Catherine yawned and sighed, and teased me to talk to her, and ran off into the court or garden the moment I began, and as a last resource cried, and said she was tired of living. Her life was useless. Mr. Heathcliff, who grew more and more disinclined to society, had almost banished Earnshaw from his apartment. Owing to an accident at the commencement of March, he became for some days a fixture in the kitchen. His gun burst while out on the hills by himself, a splinter cut his arm, and he lost a good deal of blood before he could reach home. The consequence was that, perforce, he was condemned to the fireside and tranquillity, till he made it up again. It suited Catherine to have him there. At any rate, it made her hate her room upstairs more than ever, and she would compel me to find out business below, that she might accompany me. On Easter Monday, Joseph went to Gimmerton Fair with some cattle, and in the afternoon I was busy getting up linen in the kitchen. Earnshaw sat morose as usual at the chimney corner, and my little mistress was beguiling an idle hour with drawing pictures on the window panes, varying her amusement by smothered bursts of songs, and whispered ejaculations and quick glances of annoyance and impatience in the direction of her cousin, who steadfastly smoked and looked into the grate. At a notice that I could do with her no longer intercepting my light, she removed the hearthstone. I bestowed little attention on her proceedings, but presently I heard her begin. "I found out, Hareton, that I want, that I'm glad, that I should like you to be my cousin now, if you had not grown so cross to me and so rough." Hareton returned no answer. "Hareton, Hareton, Hareton, do you hear?" she continued. "Get off with ye," he growled, with uncompromising gruffness. "Let me take that pipe," she said, cautiously advancing her hand and abstracting it from his mouth. Before he could attempt to recover it, it was broken, and behind the fire. He swore at her and seized another. "Stop," she cried. "You must listen to me first, and I can't speak while those clouds are floating in my face." "Will you go to the devil," he exclaimed ferociously, "and let me be?" "No," she persisted. "I won't. I can't tell what to do to make you talk to me. And you are determined not to understand. When I call you stupid, I don't mean anything. I don't mean that I despise you. Come, you shall take notice of me, Hareton. You are my cousin, and you shall own me." "I shall have naught to do, why, you and your mucky pride, and your damned mocking tricks," he answered. "I'll go to hell, body and soul, before I look sideways after you again. Side out, O.T. gate, now, this minute." Catherine frowned and retreated to the window seat, chewing her lip, and endeavouring, by humming an eccentric tune, to conceal a growing tendency to sob. "You should be friends with your cousin, Mr. Hareton," I interrupted, "since she repents of her sauciness. It would do you a great deal of good. It would make you another man to have her for a companion." "A companion," he cried, "when she hates me, and does not think me fit to wipe her shoon. Nay, if it made me a king, I'd not be scorned for seeking her good will any more." "It is not I who hate you, it is you who hate me," wept Cathy, no longer disguising her trouble. "You hate me as much as Mr. Heathcliff does, and more." "You're a damned liar," began Earnshaw. "Why have I made him angry? By taking your part, then, 100 times. And that when you sneered at and despised me, and go on plaguing me, and I'll step in yonder, and say you worried me out of the kitchen." "I didn't know you took my part," she answered, drying her eyes, "and I was miserable, and bitter at everybody, but now I thank you, and beg you to forgive me. What can I do besides?" She returned to the hearth, and frankly extended her hand. He blackened, and scowled like a thundercloud, and kept his fists resolutely clenched, and his gaze fixed on the ground. Catherine, by instinct, must have divined it was obdurate perversity, and not dislike, that prompted this dogged conduct, for after remaining an instant undecided, she stooped and impressed on his cheek a gentle kiss. The little rogue thought I had not seen her, and, drawing back, she took her former station by the window, quite demurely. I shook my head reprovingly, and then she blushed and whispered, "Well, what should I have done, Ellen? He wouldn't shake hands, and he wouldn't look. I must show him some way that I like him, that I want to be friends." Whether the kiss convinced Hareton, I cannot tell. He was very careful, for some minutes, that his face should not be seen, and when he did raise it, he was sadly puzzled where to turn his eyes. Catherine employed herself in wrapping a handsome book, neatly in white paper, and having tied it with a bit of ribbon, and addressed it to Mr. Hareton Earnshaw. She desired me to be her ambassadress, and convey the present to its destined recipient. "And tell him, if he'll take it, I'll come and teach him to read it right," she said. "And if he refuse it, I'll go upstairs, and never tease him again." I carried it, and repeated the message, anxiously watched by my employer. Hareton would not open his fingers, so I laid it on his knee. He did not strike it off either. I returned to my work. Catherine leaned her head and arms on the table, till she heard the slight rustle of the covering being removed. Then she stole away, and quietly seated herself beside her cousin. He trembled and his face glowed. All his rudeness and all his surly harshness had deserted him. He could not summon courage at first to utter a syllable in reply to her questioning look, and her murmured petition. "Say you forgive me, Hareton, do. You can make me so happy by speaking that little word." He muttered something inaudible. "And you'll be my friend?" added Catherine interrogatively. "Nay, you'll be ashamed of me every day of your life," he answered. "And the more ashamed, the more you know me, and I cannot bide it." "So you won't be my friend?" she said, smiling as sweet as honey, and creeping close up. I overheard no further distinguishable talk, but on looking round again, I perceived 2 such radiant countenances bent over the page of the accepted book, that I did not doubt the treaty had been ratified on both sides, and the enemies were, thenceforth, sworn allies. The work they studied was full of costly pictures, and those and their position had charm enough to keep them unmoved till Joseph came home. He, poor man, was perfectly aghast at the spectacle of Catherine, seated on the same bench with Hareton Earnshaw, leaning her hand on his shoulder, and confounded at his favourite's endurance of her proximity. It affected him too deeply to allow an observation on the subject that night. His emotion was only revealed by the immense sighs he drew, as he solemnly spread his large Bible on the table, and overlaid it with dirty banknotes from his pocket-book, the produce of the day's transactions. At length he summoned Hareton from his seat. "Tak these into tea, master lad," he said, "and bide there. I's gang up to my own realm. This hoyle's neither menseful nor seemly for us. We mun side out and search another." "Come, Catherine," I said. "We must side out too. I've done my ironing. Are you ready to go?" "It is not 8 o'clock," she answered, rising unwillingly. "Hareton, I'll leave this book upon the chimney-piece, and I'll bring some more tomorrow." "Only books that ya leave I shall tack into the hussy," said Joseph, "and it'll be mitch if ya find Emagian. So ya may place yersel." Cathy threatened that his library should pay for hers, and smiling as she passed Hareton, went singing upstairs, lighter of heart, I venture to say, than ever she had been under that roof before, except perhaps during her earliest visits to Linton. The intimacy thus commenced grew rapidly, though it encountered temporary interruptions. Earnshaw was not to be civilized with a wish, and my young lady was no philosopher, and no paragon of patience, but both their minds tending to the same point, one loving and desiring to esteem, and the other loving and desiring to be esteemed, they contrived in the end to reach it. "You see, Mr. Lockwood, it was easy enough to win Mrs. Heathcliff's heart, but now I'm glad you did not try. The crown of all my wishes will be the union of those two. I shall envy no one on their wedding day. There won't be a happier woman than myself in England."